It was just a normal Tuesday morning. An elderly man quietly steps into a local bank, faded jacket, worn veteran's cap clutching old papers, and a tarnished silver coin stamped with a ghostly raven. Within minutes, laughter echoes cruelly across the lobby. The smug manager snatches the coin, tossing it back onto the counter like trash. He points mockingly at the veteran's medal, "Thrift store special, huh?" The old man says nothing. He simply sits down, eyes fixed silently on a photograph of a young boy holding his dignity tighter than any medal. Suddenly, tires screech outside. A black SUV skids to a halt, lights flashing sharply, doors slamming open. A decorated four-star general strides into the bank and snaps into a sharp salute directly in front of the stunned old man. The room freezes. Faces turn pale. Who was he truly? And why did that raven coin make a general kneel? Raymond Ray Calder woke up early that morning, just like he had every day for as long as he could remember. By 5:30, he was already standing by the small window of his modest home in Dayton, Ohio, watching as the streetlights dimmed and the dawn slowly took over. At 79 years old, Ray lived a quiet, unnoticed life, and nobody around him had any clue that this humble, aging man was once a living legend of the United States Army. It had been over 30 years since he'd left the service, but Ray still maintained the disciplined habits he'd developed during his military career. After a simple breakfast of toast and black coffee, he put on his worn jacket and placed his faded veteran's cap embroidered faintly with "Recon Support, Pacific Division" on his head. A slightly tarnished silver medal pinned to his chest was barely recognizable as a military decoration. For Ray, these items weren't for display or to seek anyone's respect. They were merely silent reminders of the hardest yet proudest days of his life. Today, Ray had a clear purpose. He was heading to Summit Trust and Loan, a modern bank built on the same ground that 3 decades ago had been the strategic logistics center he himself had designed and operated. Hardly anyone in the small town remembered this history, except for a few faded words on a commemorative plaque nobody paused to read. On his way, Ray reached into his pocket, feeling for some old papers now yellowed with age discharge forms, a veteran's ID card, and a small but significant object from his past, a tarnished silver coin stamped with a ghostly raven whose eyes seemed to hold the deepest of secrets. They called it the Iron Raven Coin, awarded only to those who had walked into the deadliest territories during a classified mission known as Silent Crosswind, a name absent from every history book. Ray gripped the coin briefly, then loosened his hand. The cold touch of the metal brought back memories of chilling nights, waiting for orders, fallen comrades, and countless unseen sacrifices. All those stories remained buried deep within him, known by no one, not even the grandson he cared for deeply. That grandson, Jason, had recently been accepted into college, a source of pride greater than any medal Ray had ever received. But tuition for his first year posed a significant challenge given the modest pension Ray received from his veterans' benefits. That was why Ray was heading to the bank today to withdraw a small sum he'd quietly deposited many years ago, hoping it would be enough to give Jason a solid start. As Ray stepped into Summit Trust and Loan, he had no idea that this seemingly ordinary morning would become the day he confronted a past he had hidden for decades. Likewise, none of the bank employees behind the counters had any inkling that the simple elderly man entering their lobby was about to plunge the entire bank into an unprecedented silence. The bank lobby was quiet, save for the soft clicks of keyboards and the occasional murmur of conversation. Ray stepped into line, waiting patiently behind a young mother with a toddler and a man in a construction vest. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to the teller window and was greeted by a young woman named Emily Chen. Emily offered a polite smile, but it faded quickly as she scanned Ray's documents. The discharge papers were older than anything she'd ever handled. The VA card was worn thin. She tried to match the account name with what was in the system, but paused. Something didn't match. She bit her lip and said, "Just one moment, sir," before walking briskly toward the back. Moments later, a sharply dressed man emerged from the office, Derek Collier, the branch manager. Mid-30s, confident in a smug sort of way. He looked over Ray's papers with the indifference of someone who'd never known hardship. Then his eyes landed on the medal pinned to Ray's chest. "This," Derek chuckled, tapping the medal lightly with a knuckle. "Thrift store special, huh?" Emily blinked in discomfort. Ray said nothing. Then Derek noticed the coin Ray had placed carefully on the counter. "Oh, now this is cute," he scoffed, picking it up and turning it over once before tossing it back. Vintage shops are full of these novelty things. There was no humor in his voice, just cold dismissal. And then his gaze dropped to the discharge paper. "This thing," he sneered, "looks like it came out of a typewriter museum." Suddenly, without warning, Derek reached across the counter and grabbed it. "Let's test how authentic it is," he muttered, and began pulling at the corner, trying to tear it. Ray didn't move, but before the tear could go halfway, a voice cut through the lobby like thunder. "Put that down, right now!" Heads turned. Hal Vickers had emerged from the back hallway, his face, stone-cold eyes burning holes through Derek. Everything froze. Emily stood still, caught between obedience and outrage. Derek stiffened his hand still on the paper. Then he slowly released it, scoffing as if he was the one offended. He looked at Emily. "Call security," he snapped. "Have him escorted out." But Emily hesitated, eyes flicking to Ray, then to Hal. Ray, calm as ever, gently gathered the coin, slipped it into his coat pocket, and stepped back from the counter without a word. He moved slowly to a bench near the window and sat down. Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph, Jason, his grandson, smiling with his high school diploma in hand. As he stared at the picture, his fingers brushed the coin again, and for a brief second, everything shifted. A scream over radio static, a friend falling in smoke, blood on his hands, then silence. Ray blinked. He was back in the lobby, still standing guard. Ray looked at the photo, then at the coin resting briefly in his hand again. Then, with the quiet resolve of someone used to being forgotten, he tucked both away. His eyes drifted upward through the window to the American flag flapping outside. The moment held. No music, no dialogue, just the quiet of a man remembering everything and saying nothing. And somewhere between the fading smile on the photo and the way his back stayed straight, even on that hard bench, a question began to rise in the air around him. What was he thinking? Near the back of the line, half hidden behind a display for mortgage rates, Rachel Ortiz had been watching the scene unfold. Early 30s, sharp eyes behind practical glasses, she had the quiet posture of someone who'd been trained to observe before reacting. A former Air Force logistics officer, Rachel had seen her share of tense moments, but nothing quite like this. Her gaze locked onto the coin that had just clinked across the lobby floor. The glint of it under the fluorescence sent a jolt down her spine. She'd seen that symbol before. Not in public. Not in any collection museum or online catalog. Once, just once, during a classified mission briefing at an off-grid coordination site in Nevada. A man with no name, no rank on his collar had placed a coin like that on the table before giving the team their black bag assignment. The moment he did, every officer in the room straightened up. No one dared speak until he was finished. Rachel stared at the silver disc on the tile. A tarnished raven wings outstretched its eye, replaced with a six-pointed star. This wasn't decoration. It was identification known only to a few, understood by even fewer. She took out her phone and snapped a quick photo. Then she hesitated. Not for long. Scrolling through her contacts, she found one labeled Grandpa, Mobile VA, and hit send. The photo of the coin went out with a short message, "Ever seen one of these?" A few seconds passed. Her heart thumped once. Then her phone vibrated. His reply came as only one sentence. No emojis. No explanation. If that's real, no one ever speaks his name. Rachel's breath caught. The man sitting quietly by the window wasn't just a veteran. He was something else. Something layered in shadow and silence. She didn't need more confirmation, but she made a second call anyway. "Colonel Mason Price," a gruff voice answered after 2 rings. "Colonel, it's Rachel Ortiz. Sorry to call out of the blue, but I just saw something. Summit Trust Bank. Dayton. There's a man here. Elderly. Had an Iron Raven coin." There was no response for nearly 3 seconds. Then, "Did you say Iron Raven?" "Yes, sir. Tarnished. Real." Another pause. "Is he still there?" "He is. They're trying to kick him out. Do not let that happen." Rachel straightened. "Sir, I want you to listen very carefully," Mason said. His voice dropped an octave, steady and clipped. "You are to stay in that bank. Keep your eyes on him. And no matter what happens, do not let him walk out of that building. That man isn't just a veteran. He's history." "Yes, sir," she replied already, moving toward the bench where Ray still sat, back straight, hands folded, face unreadable. Meanwhile, in a back hallway of the bank, an older man had also taken notice. Hal Vickers, Senior Facilities Coordinator, though the title hadn't changed in 30 years, had been watching the monitors from a distance. He hadn't heard the words, but he'd seen the coin. And the name Calder had echoed from Derek's lips one too many times. Hal shuffled toward the staff hallway, past break rooms and printer nooks, to a narrow alcove where a brass plaque hung. It was slightly dusty. Few noticed it these days, but Hal did. The plaque read, "In honor of those who built the Foundation Summit Operations Command Site, 1985-1991. Beneath that header were a series of names. Many were fading. One, however, stood sharp and deep in the metal, refinished once by Hal himself, years ago when the bank first moved in. Raymond J. Calder, Logistics Architect. Hal didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just looked at the name, then back toward the lobby. And for the first time that day, someone in the building began to understand who they were really dealing with. The sound came first, sharp, abrupt, and completely out of place. A single chirp of a siren outside the glass front doors of Summit Trust Bank. Not drawn out, not frantic. Just one clean, decisive pulse. A sound that made people turn. The security guard's hand dropped instinctively to his belt. Customers near the window leaned forward. And then they saw it. A black SUV, sleek and polished like a diplomat's motorcade, rolled to a stop at the curb. It didn't park it, arrived like an event. One tire clipped the yellow line, and the engine cut instantly. Tinted windows, matte rims, no license plate in front. The kind of vehicle you didn't question. The passenger door opened first. A young man in a dark, crisp service uniform stepped out, scanned the surroundings with practiced calm, then moved toward the rear door. That's when the second door opened, and out stepped General Thomas Rourke Rhett. Tall, silver-haired posture carved from discipline. He wore his full-dress blues. Not a wrinkle, not a crease out of place. His chest bore 2 rows of decorations, each one earned, none ostentatious. His boots hit the pavement with the rhythm of command. It wasn't showmanship. It was presence. Inside the bank, time fractured. Every conversation dropped. A woman near the loan office clutched her purse. Even the manager, Derek Collier, stepped back from the teller line without realizing it. Ray didn't move. He didn't look out the window. He didn't react when the bank fell into a hush. But he felt the shift in the room like a cold front. And when the door swung open with that sound of solid weight against steel hinges, he finally looked up. General Rourke entered without pause. He didn't stop to ask questions, didn't glance left or right. He walked like he had a purpose no one else needed to understand. Like the floor had been cleared for him in advance. Like gravity itself bowed slightly beneath his boots. And then he stopped. Right in front of Ray. What happened next took less than a second, but froze the entire lobby. Rourke came to attention. With military precision, he brought his hand sharply to his brow in salute. The sound, his palm snapping against his cap, rang out louder than the bank's overhead music ever had. A few customers gasped. Someone near the back dropped a pen. The teller, Emily, instinctively stood. Ray, quiet as ever, slowly rose to his feet. No rush, no dramatics. Just a man who knew how to stand straight, even after decades of weight on his spine. He returned the salute with steady, practiced motion. No pride, just protocol. Muscle memory carved from sacrifice. And in that moment, nobody laughed. Nobody moved. And Derek Collier, watching it all unfold from behind the counter, felt the blood drain from his face. General Rourke lowered his hand and took a breath, as if steadying something far heavier than the air around him. Then, without a glance to anyone else, he turned and walked to the main counter. His boots echoed like verdicts against marble. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a slim leather folio, sealed, stamped, and marked with the crest of the Department of Defense. He placed it firmly on the counter directly in front of Derek. Then he looked the young manager dead in the eyes. This man Rourke said, voice low, but cutting, designed the logistics framework that kept half the eastern seaboard operational during 6 years of covert conflict. When roads were gone, fuel was scarce, and commands were scattered, we ran, because he made sure we could. I flew choppers through hell with evac orders, drawn from the very system he architected. He didn't blink. And you thought you were qualified to ask if his medals were real. Derek's lips parted, but nothing came out. The color in his face had turned the hue of week-old chalk. Rourke didn't need to say more. The silence was louder than rage. That's when Hal Vickers emerged from the hallway, his steps unhurried, a clipboard in hand. His eyes didn't leave Derek. And this man, Hal said, nodding at Rourke before pointing with the clipboard. This same junior manager, just 2 weeks ago, suggested we remove the wall memorial near the break room. He paused, said it was wasting space that could be used for more customer awards. Rachel Ortiz gasped. Emily covered her mouth. Rourke didn't even turn his head. He just said quietly, "What name was on that memorial?" Hal took a breath. Colonel Raymond J. Calder. Rourke nodded once. I thought so. At that moment, Derek turned his head slowly, as if resisting the weight of the world. His eyes locked onto the brass plaque near the back hallway. For the first time, he truly saw it. The name engraved there, shiny, bold, irrefutable. Raymond J. Calder, Logistics Architect, 1985-1991. His expression collapsed. Smugness gone. Jaws clenched, fists slack. There was no place left to stand. No words could save him. Around the room, no one cheered. No one needed to. The silent satisfaction was unanimous, like a courtroom where the gavel never drops, but justice is felt all the same. General Rourke turned back toward Ray, offering a faint nod of respect, and spoke just loud enough for the room to hear Colonel Calder didn't serve for applause. But this moment, this is ours to remember. And for the first time all morning, Ray allowed a breath to escape, not a sigh, not a boast. Just a man finally seen. The tension in the bank still hung like heavy smoke. Everyone was waiting for the thunder that usually followed lightning. General Rourke turned to the stunned bank staff and made a subtle gesture with 2 fingers toward the branch director standing near the offices. The meaning was clear. Handle it. Now. The director, pale and nervous, stepped forward, lips parting to issue the kind of HR scripted apology that would surely be followed by disciplinary action or termination. But before the words could land, Ray raised a hand gently. He didn't stand. He didn't even raise his voice. But when he spoke, the room listened as though the walls themselves leaned in. "He's young," Ray said. "And sometimes youth comes with arrogance that life hasn't had time to chisel yet." He looked over at Derek, not with anger, not even pity, but with a kind of quiet, earned understanding. If he learned something today, Ray continued, then maybe it was worth it. Then a beat. "I didn't wear this uniform so only the wise would have rights. I wore it so even foolishness could speak freely. That's the price and the privilege of a free country." No one spoke. Even Rourke seemed momentarily taken aback. Then he gave Ray the faintest smile, tight-lipped proud, and a touch ashamed that he'd nearly forgotten who men like Calder were. Ray turned his attention back to the counter. Emily, hands trembling, had just finished printing the paperwork, Ray's modest withdrawal annotated with old account routing numbers that hadn't been used in a decade, but somehow still held value. She slid the paper toward him with both hands, like it was more than a transaction, like it was penance. Then softly she said, "Your grandson. He's lucky to have you." Ray met her eyes. For a second they held. No speeches, no nods to medals or missions or memories that still bled in the dark corners of his mind. Just a small, quiet look. And then he nodded. Once, he folded the papers and tucked them into the same worn envelope he had carried in with him. The same envelope that had held his discharge papers, old photos, and that iron coin that had brought ghosts to life. Then gently, he slid the coin into his pocket again. Emily watched every move, and she knew even if she never saw him again, she would remember this day for the rest of her life. Not because a general walked in, not because justice was served, but because a quiet man reminded everyone in that room what honor looked like, not in uniform, not in ceremony, but in silence, grace, and restraint. And because somehow, even after all that had been done to him that morning, he still walked out of that bank carrying less anger than the rest of them. Ray folded the last slip of paper and stood slowly, the weight of age and silence balanced evenly on his shoulders. General Rourke stepped forward, placed a steady hand on Ray's shoulder, and leaned in just enough for only them to hear. "Colonel," he said softly, "give us 5 minutes." No further orders were given, no announcement made, but somehow everyone in the lobby understood. Like a wave rolling across the room, people began to rise. First, Rachel Ortiz's heels clicking together in quiet salute. Then, the older gentleman who had sat near the door. A mother gently guided her child up from the play table. Even the security guard, once stiff with confusion, stood tall and pressed a hand to his brow. Veterans and civilians alike, one by one. No music, no flag, no camera flash, just silence and respect. Ray looked around slowly, unsure at first what was happening. His brow furrowed slightly, then smoothed as realization dawned. This was not a tribute he expected, nor one he wanted. But it was the one he had earned. His eyes, for the first time that morning, shimmered, but no tears fell. Instead, he straightened once more and returned the salute, not sharp, not dramatic, just sincere. A man acknowledging the acknowledgement, then quietly letting it go. Rourke reached into his coat and retrieved a small velvet box. He held it out without ceremony, just gravity. Ray opened it. Inside was a narrow silver bar, polished and engraved with only 4 words, "Service Beyond Record." Ray stared at it for a long moment, then nodded once. Closed the box. No need to say thank you. The box itself was the thank you. A week later, near the break room of Summit Trust Bank, where once a forgotten plaque had hung unnoticed, something new had been added. Etched in clean, deliberate lettering beneath the original brass, Colonel Raymond J. Calder, quiet honor, enduring legacy, no spotlights, no unveiling. But every morning after someone stopped to read it, and paused a little longer before they walked away. That same afternoon, a blue sedan pulled up to the curb outside Summit Trust. Jason Ray's grandson jumped out waving. "Grandpa, everything go okay?" Ray smiled, nodded. "Yeah, just fine." Jason never noticed the stares from inside. He just took Ray's hand, and the two walked away. One holding the future, the other carrying a legacy.